This is a 1971 Johnson Seahorse, 6 horsepower. My dad, or my grandfather, I'm not sure which, bought this thing brand new. And you can see we used to have license on the motor. Every year you had to go renew the license. But this thing hasn't been used in probably 30 years, 25 years anyway. It's been stored in the basement, so I'm going to drop this lower unit off. I've already got the 4 bolts right there. They actually are underneath here, and this lower unit should just drop straight down. I've got the bucket underneath it in case any oil or anything drips out. I don't want it to get on my concrete, but I'm going to do that, and I'm going to take this cover off and probably replace the spark plugs, clean the carburetor, maybe rebuild the carburetor, which is right there. It's a real simple engine. It's 2-cylinder though, so that's pretty nice. 6 horsepower, so it should run pretty quiet and pretty smooth. I have a 6 horsepower 1-cylinder on my little sailboat, and it's kind of noisy and it vibrates a lot, so I'm going to get busy pulling this out. Okay, I have the 4 bolts out, and I pulled the lower unit down just enough to expose that brass screw right there that is actually attaching the shift rod that puts it in forward and reverse. So until you disengage that screw, you have to pull it all the way out, because there's a I guess I call it a key. It's a groove. So without pulling that screw out, the bottom will not come off, or the bottom unit, the lower unit, will not come off. So I have to take that screw out to get it to come down. It was too tight for a screwdriver, so I'm using a 3/8 drive. So you got to be careful when you pull it out, because the lower unit could drop. Okay, now it's dropped down. You can see the screw that's right here was screwed up against this right here. It goes up in that groove, and that keeps it from that actually allows it to make connection to where when you shift it, it can I'll show you. See how it goes up and down when you hit the shift key? Up here is the shifter for forward, reverse. So that actually actuates this up and down, puts it in gear and out of gear. So what you're looking at here is the water pump with the 4 screws on top. And I'm going to take those 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to take those off, and I should remove the cover, and we should be able to see the impeller that I don't think has ever been replaced from the day that this thing was new. So that's when we get taken off of there now. I'm kind of scared to see what it's going to look like. Okay, so now I've got the screws out. I'm going to pull this up to expose the impeller, and there's the impeller. So I'm going to have to take these 2 pins out of the drive shaft. This is the shaft. You see the splines? It goes up into the bottom of the engine, which allows it, and that spins, the engine spins this shaft, which in turn, when it's in gear, spins your propeller. So I'm going to take these 2 pins out, or this pin, so I can get the water pump over the shaft and be able to replace the impeller. Okay, I have the pin out now. That's where the pin was. So now I should be able to just pull this up and off. Set that to the side, and then this impeller, I took a picture of the way it was laying on top of there, so I know how to put the new one on, which is a good idea. You notice there's a keyed hole. See how it's got that little notch? That's where this thing goes in to keep it from, to make sure it goes in the right spot. And you'll see in the front of the shaft is a place for the key right there. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up, get the oil replaced, put a new impeller in it, put it all back together, and then work on the engine. Alright, I removed the fuel filter, which it actually appears not to be too dirty. I got it right over here. You can see it right there. It's actually not dirty, but I'm going to clean it up anyway. And then now I'm taking the spark plugs out. Now those do look pretty bad. There you can see how bad it is. It's pretty nasty looking. There's no way that would run. So I'm going to take those out, replace them. I'm also going to remove that carburetor, which is right here, this whole device here. Not exactly sure how to take it out yet. I know these bolts here and back in here will remove it, but you'll have to take a fuel line off. Well, I've had to remove a lot more stuff than I thought I was going to have to. This retracting spooling device, I'm not sure what it's called. I had to take a couple of screws out of the top to move it out of the way to get to this back screw on the carburetor. Otherwise, you just couldn't get to it to open, loosen the bolt or the nut. So I'm going to pull this carb out and then reassemble everything around it. That way I don't forget where everything went. Again, I took pictures of everything to make sure that I don't forget how stuff goes back together, which has always worked for me in the past. I'm going to clean the carburetor for the 71 Johnson Seahorse 6 horsepower outboard. I don't think this carburetor has been open probably in 20 plus years. And you can see I pulled the screws out of the carburetor and I get to the inside of the carburetor, and there's a lot of oil on the screws, which might indicate oil inside the carb, which is kind of a common problem, at least for me, on any outboard I've had, especially the 2 cycles. And that's why a lot of times, if your outboard will not start, just take the carburetor apart, clean the oil out of the inside of the carb, put it back together, and it'll start right up. At least that's been the case for me. So I'm going to take this off and see what I run into. Well, surprisingly, I took it apart, and you can see the inside of this thing. God, it looks like it was, and it could be, I went back in time and it's 1971. Look how clean that is on the inside. Not a spot of oil. So my dad was pretty meticulous, and my grandfather was real meticulous about taking care of their stuff, and because we, couldn't afford to replace one if it went bad, so we took really good care of our equipment. And from what I can see, this thing seems to be in pretty good shape. The float, it's got some oil on it, but it looks like it's intact. So I'm going to put it back together and clean it up with some carb cleaner, put it back together, and I have new spark plugs, and I have a new impeller. I'm not going to replace the points or anything unless I have a problem starting it. Then I'll get into that. So let's put it back together and see what we come up with. All right, new spark plugs, new impeller on the lower unit, cleaned the carburetor, and I didn't gap the spark plugs. I'm just assuming they're pre-gapped from the factory. But if it doesn't run very good, then I'll know. I didn't do anything with the points. You can see the points because I don't have a wheel puller to pull the flywheel off. I'm going to give it a go. I got an issue with the retract spring that retracts the pull cord, but I'll take care of that when I'm done.
Oh my goodness, it turned.
This thing, I don't know what to do with this.
What's your finger? Prime it.